love bugs, welcome back to my channel. I'm so excited to have you guys here today. I am doing my mid-year book tag, which I know it is now September, so it's a little bit belated. I did have this video fully filmed and edited in June, and something happened to it and it just didn't exist. I think the file corrupted or something. It just didn't exist anymore. So I still had the raw footage and I was like, damn, I'm gonna have to re-edit this entire video. And then when I looked back at the raw footage, I realized that I looked kind of bad in it. So I decided to just film this video again later in the year once I've read a couple more books and when I'm no longer visually assailing you with myself. So yeah, here we are today. I'm gonna do the tag backwards for no reason, just for fun. What books do you want to read by the end of the year? Okay, I have a couple. For most of the questions. There is this new book that's been released called The Hymn to Dionysus, and I'm really excited about it. It is a retelling, I assume, of The Hymn to Dionysus, although The Hymn to Dionysus, at least that I'm thinking of, is pretty short, so I'm sure it'll be longer than just, you know, a one-page hymn. I found out about it on an Instagram ad, which we all know is the best place to get book recommendations, so I'm super excited about it. It is being marketed on my Instagram as a queer retelling of Dionysus. So just a retelling of Dionysus. And yeah, I'm really excited about it. I've decided that I'm gonna give Greek mythology retellings another chance. Maybe just for this book. We'll see. Yeah, I mean, I do take a lot of, I have a whole video about kind of my issues with a lot of the new wave modern retellings of not only Greek mythology, but also Shakespeare in my Lady Macbeth video. Just because I feel like so often it really misses the mark in its messaging and doesn't actually end up being extremely feminist or having anything really new to say about the story. And I also feel like it's kind of a trend right now to do like the Greek mythology retellings. So a lot of them just feel a little bit cash grabby. It was genuine in the beginning, you know? It started off genuine, but I feel like nowadays I just see so many of them that I'm like, there's no way you actually felt this strongly about Alcestis, you know? I saw an Alcestis retelling. I was like, Alcestis? If you had a gun to my head and said you have to write a Greek mythology retelling, Alcestis wouldn't even be in the top 25 of the things that I think about. And you know what? Maybe I'll read that one too and I'll see if it's good. I shouldn't knock it just because I don't like the original. The Hymn to Dionysus, I mean, doesn't make any claims about being a feminist retelling, but I am interested nonetheless. I feel like Dionysus is a really interesting character in Greek mythology. He's got a lot of really weird stuff about him that I feel like doesn't really mesh with his pop culture image, or that like isn't it as prevalent in the pop culture image of him, so I am really interested to see what the author does with that, if she chooses to address that at all, or what elements of it she does choose to address. So I'm excited about that one. Another book, Catabasis by R.F. Kuang. This was my most anticipated book of the year. I'm like this far into it. That's my bookmark. I'm like 70% of the way through. So I'm almost done, and so far I've been really liking it. I know that this book has gotten a lot of mixed reviews already on the internet, and even with the early reviews were like not very good, and people had a lot of criticism for it, but honestly I have been really enjoying it. I have like a couple minor things that I would say about it, but so far I'm really liking it. Definitely will have a dedicated video coming soon, so I'll keep my thoughts short so far. But, oh, I should tell you what this book is about. This book is about two PhD students whose professor recently passed away in this horrific manner, and they decide to go into the underworld, into hell, to go get his soul and retrieve him back to the living world so that he can write them a letter of recommendation. Very fun premise. And I've really been enjoying it. I've been seeing a lot of stuff about how it reads like a textbook and people can't connect with the characters. I honestly don't feel that at all. I feel like the characters are pretty well fleshed out so far. I think the main character is interesting, and I don't feel like it reads like a textbook at all. So yeah, so far I like it a lot. I think that's all I'm going to say for now, but so far I've been really liking it. I'm excited to see how it ends. Another book that I want to read by the end of the year is Moby Dick. I have never read this book, and I feel like it's time, you know? It's huge, it's enormous, and I'm excited about it. One of my professors told me that it was his favorite book, so I'm excited. But he's also the smartest man I've ever met, so, you know, that is a little bit concerning to me. But yeah, I'm excited about this one. I don't really have anything to say about it, but I just feel like it's time for me to read it. It's an American classic, and it's time. The most beautiful book I bought this year, I think this is a gorgeous edition. This is the 50th anniversary Penguin Classics edition, and I just think the illustration is beautiful. The colors, I don't know if they're going to show up super well on this camera, but the colors are gorgeous. This composition with the cat and the woman, gorge, so pretty. I have actually started this one too, and then I kind of took a break because Katabasis got released. I really loved the first part though, so it is like I am gonna get back to it as soon as I finish Katabasis, but I really like this so far. I thought it was super interesting. I think the narration is really well done. Yeah, so I haven't read too much of it yet, but I am really enjoying it. Biggest surprises for me this year, I was recommended the book God Killer by one of my subscribers, and so I wouldn't say it was a surprise that I liked it because I think they recommended it to me knowing that I would like it, but I had just never heard of it before. And so I really enjoyed this book. This book is a high fantasy. I really liked all of the characters and the relationships that they built over the course of the story. I thought were really interesting and really strong. That was really a strong point of the story for me, was just like seeing the character interactions. And I thought a lot of the world building was really cool. I feel like it's a take on like fantasy worlds with multiple, like polytheistic fantasy worlds with multiple minor gods that I haven't really seen before. And I think it's really interesting. I also am currently reading the second book, but I have taken a little bit of a break with it because it's not gripping me the same way that the first book did, but I do intend to finish it. I will finish it. My one note for it is that I kind of didn't care about the romance. I feel like the romance was like kind of take it or leave it for me. I didn't really feel the connection, but you know, maybe things will change in the later books. Maybe there'll be maybe I'll really be gripped by the romance. But I mean, another surprising book was Immaculate Conception by Ling Ling Huang. I have previously really liked her book called Natural Beauty, which came out a couple years ago, and I really liked that one, and I also really liked Immaculate Conception. I think that Immaculate Conception is a very interesting book in just like the way that it tackles topics that I haven't really seen tackled before, especially with okay, I'm just going to tell you what it's about. This is okay. So it's about the primary relationship that it focuses on is the friendship between these two art students, university art students, as they go from like their first day of class throughout college and beyond. So just kind of the rest of their, not the rest of their lives, but you know, many decades of their lives. And I think that what is really interesting about this book is that it starts to tackle the topic of AI, especially in creative spaces, because while they're in their art program, there is this, you know, invention of a generative AI art software that starts to threaten their creative licenses and, you know, what counts as art. It really starts to shake up the art scene. And I feel like maybe because generative AI in the capacity that we have it today is pretty new. This is the first time that I've ever seen a book like really tackle that topic head on and talk about it, and so I thought that that was really interesting to read about. It's so interesting just the way that technology and these like major advances in technology are approached in the book, and I think that's it's such a like a new and it's such a new field of the genre and of just like, you know, the topics that artists are tackling because AI is still in this kind of new phase. So it's really interesting to see, and I think that we're gonna see a lot more books that deal very explicitly with AI in creative spaces and with kind of the imposition of technology on our daily lives. I think that's going to be a topic that more and more books and movies and art and all of that really take on very seriously. And of course, AI has existed in sci-fi movies and all that for a long time. But I guess what I mean is like talking about AI as a direct response to like ChatGPT and whatever the art softwares are called. Another book that surprised me this year, sorry, I have three, is Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. And I am surprised by this book because I mean, I've seen it recommended for like years. It's been popular for a long time, and I just kind of never expressed an interest in it until I went to the Superman movie, and the trailer for the movie adaptation of Project Hail Mary came on beforehand, and I was like, that actually does look kind of good. So I read the book. I'll say that I don't know if Andy Weir is completely for me. I just don't know that his humor is something that always resonates with me. But I did actually really like the book. I thought it was very enjoyable. Project Hail Mary is about this guy who previously was a like PhD scientist, but is now working as a grade school science teacher, and he is brought onto this task force of assessing a problem that it's, you know, it's not easy to explain. The earth is experiencing diminishing heat and energy from the sun because it's getting absorbed and like eaten up by these tiny microscopic organisms that are living in the atmosphere of Venus. So he, being a like leading scientist in this field before becoming a grade school teacher, is brought on to kind of oversee the project and to work on it, and eventually this is kind of like the timeline of the book kind of jumps back and forth, so it's not a spoiler. He is one of the astronauts sent out on the mission to find a way to solve this problem and essentially like get rid of all the little amoeba things that are eating all the energy. It sounds a lot smarter whenever it's in Andy Weir's words, but that's what the premise of the book is. I did like the book. I thought it was very enjoyable. I thought it was a fun and entertaining read. Something that bothered me about it, though, is something that also bothered me about The Martian, which he also did. And it's the way that science is treated in the book. And I know that I just gave the worst explanation of the plot possible, but I'm gonna need you to just stick with me for a second. I think that Andy Weir's work really posits itself as being very grounded and like easily understood sci-fi that is very rooted in actual science. So the way that he engages with science, I think, is a little bit bizarre at times. A lot of the time he will be explaining something that is middle school level, like at the most. There was this point, paraphrasing, this is not going to be exact, but there's this point where the main character says, oh wow, this organism can survive at 98 degrees Celsius. That's almost the boiling point of water. Who were you talking to? I can't imagine that any adult needs that reiterated to them, that 100 degrees is where water boils. And I know that, like, and I'm speaking as an American, first of all, and you can get in my comments and you can say, actually, people are way stupider than you think. A lot of people are really dumb and they didn't know this. And I believe you. But I just think that it kind of cheapens the science of the whole book when you're explaining something that is so elementary. Because why would a scientist... I'm about to freak out. Why would a scientist ever say that. Unless you're talking to a child. Who are you talking to? And in the book, he's talking to a grown woman who isn't even American. So this is obviously in there for the American audience, and I feel like that's not enough. I mean, maybe the publisher was like, hey, you gotta specify what temperature this is in Fahrenheit or whatever the fuck. I really don't think that's, I think that, am I crazy to think that, I feel like I'm losing my mind. There's another point where the character tells us what mitosis is. He's like, oh, mitosis is when a cell divides. I know! I went to middle school. And that's what's crazy, is that he'll explain these very basic concepts to you, but then other concepts in the book are completely fucking fictional. There's this character in the book, okay, a little bit of spoilers, not really because it's also in the movie trailer, and I think people probably know about it before they go into the book. It might actually be in the summary of the book on the back, but I didn't read it because I watched the movie trailer instead. He meets this alien creature, and the alien character is from this planet that has never learned about relativistic physics, and so they only use Newtonian physics, and they're like space traveling. I told this to my friend who is a physics student, and he laughed in my face. So we've got his opinion as a physicist, my opinion as a linguist, is that the way that language is tackled in this book is crazy, because he and the alien devised this system where they basically are just like making gestures to each other and then putting it into a spreadsheet to create like a dictionary. The the extent of this spreadsheet and like the ease with which they create it and are able to fully communicate fluently is wild. You really just have to like move past this in the book. Like you just have to not think about it, because it just like it falls apart. I mean, and I liked the book. I thought it was entertaining, but like you can't think about this aspect of it for very long, because it just is truly, it is. And look, I know it is science fiction, okay? I know it's gonna be a little bit outside of the realm of possibility, but my point is that it establishes itself as being very truthful to science that you, the audience, are familiar with because you learned it in middle school. And so it is a little bit confounding of the mind whenever all of a sudden he says that the alien calls him the alien word for grace, because the main character's last name is Grace. So the human character's last name is Grace, and whenever they're communicating their names to each other, he just kind of comes up with a name for the alien because he's not able to replicate the alien sounds. But he makes note that the alien calls him the alien word for grace, because grace is also like a word, not just a name. You are not telling me that your bitch ass explained the concept of grace to an alien to the extent that he both understands it and has an equivalent concept in his alien society. I'm gonna lose my mind. I'm actually gonna lose my shit on that one. Whenever he said that, I was like, okay, why not just say that he made up a name for you too? That makes so much more sense. How do you know that he's calling you the alien name for grace? Why would the alien have an equivalent concept of grace in his alien society? I'm gonna lose my mind. But so like my point is that it is confuddling whenever you have somebody both explain that 98 degrees Celsius is almost the temperature at which water boils, and that he's able to communicate fluently with an alien in like a week. Like, it's just a spectrum of believability that is bizarre. But I have to move on. To wrap up my thoughts, I actually really did like the book, and I thought it was really entertaining. My biggest disappointments of the year. Okay, wow, I've already been filming for a while. Okay, this one actually is so disappointing. Wow, that was a really harsh mood shift for me right now. The Starving Saints is a book that just came out. It came out over the summer, around the middle of the year, I would say. And I was so excited about it because the premise sounded so interesting. It is about this like medieval kind of fantasy castle that is under siege, and so they're running out of food. And just as it seems all hope is lost, this band of like mysterious nuns who are maybe also gods and like some kind of otherworldly being comes in and they start to help people, but they also seem to be sinister. It sounds so good. And I thought the characters were really interesting, and I thought the writing style was also good, but I just could not get into it. Like, I don't know what it was about this book that it just, like, wasn't working for me basically ever. Like, I was so excited about it, but I had to DNF it. I DNF'd it at, like, 60%. So, like, I really did give it a shot. And I was just telling myself, like, oh, it's gonna get to a point where I'm just gonna get into it and I'm gonna really like it. And that never happened. And maybe it is just an issue of like me not being in the mood for that kind of book at the time, or like just the vibe not working in that specific moment. But I don't know what it was about it. It just didn't work. I was just never invested. And I liked all the characters and I thought the concept was really cool. Well, I didn't like actually, I didn't like the girl, the Trila, I think was her name. The main characters are, in shorthand, the like witch madwoman character, absolutely adore. The night lady character, love. And this like girl, I don't know. I just didn't really vibe with her. But I mean, she's only a third of the book, so like, why couldn't I just get into it? I think there was something in the writing style about where it was just like every chapter kind of started with a hook, and so it felt like we weren't actually really like it always felt like something was being set up for later, and nothing was actually progressing. And maybe that is why I had an issue with it. Maybe if somebody else has also read this book, you can let me know if you had the same experience. I don't know that that's why it wasn't working for me, but that's as in-depth of a thought as I could conceive of it. Like that's as far as I got with figuring out why it didn't work for me. I would be willing to give it another shot though later on, so if you really liked the book, if you read it and you really liked it, please let me know in the comments, and maybe I will give it another shot. Another book that disappointed me is I read the book Wrath Gotta Sing with a group at my school consisting of several grad students, actually only three. I said several, but there were only three of us, including myself, and the professor who ran the group. Wrath Gotta Sing is a retelling of the Iliad in which Achilles is a trans woman. There is a story, part of the kind of tradition is that Achilles, in order to dodge the draft basically for the Trojan War, temporarily cross-dresses as a woman and hides away on the island of Skyros, and is pretty quickly discovered and taken to go fight in the Trojan War. So obviously in that version he's not actually trans, but I think that it is not a stretch really for a modern writer to interpret it that way and to explore that as a storyline. I think that is a really interesting idea and really explores the gender dynamics and especially like non-conformative gender dynamics. But I would also say that that's not really what this book does, because while this is a retelling of the Iliad, it's also has almost nothing in common with the Iliad. And here's the thing, I think the writer is good. I think that she's a talented writer. I think that she's a skillful writer. I thought that the book just didn't work for me. So the author is also a trans woman, which I think is important to it especially because the way that womanhood and gender is explored in this book I didn't really like, and I thought was very bioessentialist actually. And really a lot of it centralized around women in pregnancy and kind of equating those things of like kind of almost taking on the statement of like to be a woman is to be pregnant. And I just didn't really like that. I feel like it kind of missed the mark in a lot of ways for me, but there were a lot of parts of it that I thought were strong, but it was just kind of a bizarre read, honestly. If it sounds interesting to you, I would recommend it because it will not be what you expect. So, I mean, it's worth reading just to see if you like it. But yeah, I didn't really like that take. I thought it was kind of a weird exploration. The role of slavery in pretty much every Greek mythology retelling is dicey, and I think that this book does not really handle it well. What is your most anticipated release for the second half of the year? It was Calabasas. It was this one, and now I have it. Whenever I made this video the first time, it wasn't out yet, but now it is. And that's the benefit of not doing your mid-year book tag in September. Oh, another book that came out actually like a couple months ago, but I'm still very excited about is Ocean Vuong's new book, Emperor of Gladness. I don't even know what it's about, but I love Ocean Vuong's work. He is primarily a poet, but he also had before this another novel come out, and this one is also a novel. So I just really love his work. I think that his poetry especially is just incredible. A lot of my favorite poems are poems from him, which I feel like is kind of basic, but I just think that he writes in a way that nobody else does. Like, he just has such a unique way of tackling the topics that he does, and he's able to write in such a concise but such a cutting way. I think that he's just a masterful poet and really incredible. So I'm excited about this book regardless of what it's about. I don't even have to know before I start it. My favorite sequel of the year so far, Fearless, does win by default because it is the only sequel that I have completed this year. Moving on. The best book I've read in 2025 so far. I have a couple for this one as well. First of all, my friend group's book club, we read together The Handmaid's Tale, and I think that that is an excellent book. I think that it's really well done. I think so. The Handmaid's Tale is a dystopian book that follows our main character who lives in this society that is part of the United States, which has been overthrown by this extremist religious like government. She is part of a group called the Handmaids, who are basically like the incubators for the wives who are actually married to the like male politicians and stuff. And it's about her experience within this dystopian society, and primarily the book is really just about her experience. There's not really a like set plot that she sets out to do, but I think that it's really well done, and I think that it, of course there were external circumstances that led to my friend group reading this book this year, and I think that this book is still really relevant to, maybe especially relevant right now. Something that really sticks with me about the book is the way that it's not afraid to make the main character not be the hero and not be this revolutionary figure, because there are multiple points within the book where she does, even though she has her small rebellions and she does have her own thoughts and her own objections to the government that she's living in, she's not like Katniss Everdeen, she's not going out and doing these major demonstrations and being very public about it. And I think that's something that's so powerful about it, is that whenever she sees these injustices happen, like there's a point in the book where she says she and another one of the handmaids that she's walking with see some guy just get like pulled off the street and shoved into a van, and the first thing she thinks is like, I'm so glad that's not me. And I think that that's really important, and I think that that's really, it's such a terrible thing to think, but it's so real. And I think that it is something that a lot of people, myself included, experience. And it is such like an ugly reaction, but it's so real. It's so real that like it's so easy to see what's happening in the news and not let it affect your day because it doesn't affect you personally. It's so easy to just change the channel or scroll or turn off your phone. It's so easy to let it not be you until, one day it's going to be you. And it's not something that's, respectable to acknowledge. It's not something that makes you look like a good person. But it is so real. You can have all these internal ideas of if I were in XYZ situation, I would do this. But then when you're actually there, what do? You know, it's so easy to just let it be somebody else who's in trouble. Let it be some other person, some other country, some other anything. It's so easy to just let it not be you. And I think that's really powerful. And just like that's something that is so necessary to acknowledge, because how else are you going to destroy that line of thinking? I also just finished The Message by Ta-Nehisi Coates, and this was extremely good. It's a nonfiction book, kind of essay style, from this man who is an American journalist, a Black American journalist, and writes firstly about his own experience as a Black journalist. And something really interesting and that I think is really powerful at the beginning of the book is his writing about writing itself and the power of it and the accessibility of it, writing as this tool for activism and his experience with writing and like what drove him to it. And then the largest section of the book, the final section of the book, is about his experience, first of all, going to Israel and see a couple years ago and seeing the treatment of Palestinian people by the Israeli soldiers. And he goes into this very complex and like extremely detailed and I think very like well nuanced discussion of the situation there. And this book was published last year, so of course was written before that, and I'm not sure like at what point it was completed. So he doesn't fully get into the ongoing genocide quite yet, but he does talk about just what brought us here. That he's able to talk about a lot, so many different aspects, so many different political and historical components, and tie them all together in what is a really strong denouncement of the current genocide. And I think it's a really strong book. Okay, I'm actually noticing that I missed a couple questions, so let me go back for a second. A book that made me cry: John Green's new book, Everything's Tuberculosis. So it's a nonfiction book about the way that tuberculosis has shaped history and politics and really driven a lot of events in history. But it's also interspliced with a narrative of John Green himself interacting with a tuberculosis patient and the like real experience of this tuberculosis patient. And it's so emotional, and I just wasn't really expecting it to be so personal. I was expecting it to be a little bit of a more reserved approach to tuberculosis, but I think it's really good that it was such a personal description of tuberculosis, because in the Western world, it's very easy to look at tuberculosis as a disease from the past, as something that doesn't affect us anymore, because we have really accessible and really readily accessible access to the vaccine. So it's really eye-opening to see that that's not the case worldwide, and that so many societies still suffer from tuberculosis, and that so much of it is the fault of companies like Johnson & Johnson and big pharma companies that just put too high of a price on vaccines. And so, I mean, while this is a book about tuberculosis, it is also a very strong denouncement of big pharma, and that I think is really important, especially from John Green, who is such a high-profile writer. He's obviously going to reach a much larger audience than an activist or a scientist, which is unfortunate, but I think it is really important and really great that he's taking such a strong stance on it. And I mean, it is also just interesting from a historical perspective how influential tuberculosis has been on the development of major events in history, which I had no idea about, and I think is really, really interesting. It's such a creative idea to unite all of this. Maybe not idea, because obviously it's nonfiction, it's true, but it's such a creative lens to look through history and to track the way that this one disease has really had such an impact on human development and like social movements. I think I really liked it. Yeah. A book that made me happy: I mostly read sad books, as you might have noticed from this entire tag. But I did reread The Great Gatsby recently, and It actually, I really do. I had forgotten how much I liked it because I read it in high school, and just the prose is so beautiful. And I think that it's a story that's like it's written in such a beautiful way. It's such a short book, but I think it's very impactful. And I found myself really being moved by the ending. And something that I think is so interesting about it is also its treatment of race. And not to say that F. Scott Fitzgerald was ahead of his times by any means, but I think that that is such an important aspect of the book that I don't see brought up quite as often as like the Gatsby parties and stuff. Is that like Tom is basically, in his own words, like a white supremacist, and just the way that race plays pretty heavily into the book is really interesting to look back on. I think that The Great Gatsby is also just such an interesting book to look back on historically because I really don't think anything like it can ever be recreated. Like a 1920s book like that can never be recreated because, and what I mean by that, sorry, is that it was written during the Roaring Twenties, about the Roaring Twenties, and about the fragility of this new money and the like kind of illusion of wealth, the rapid accumulation of wealth, the insubstantiality of wealth when it comes to happiness. And I think that that's so interesting because pretty like couple years after this will be the Great Depression and people will lose everything. And so I think that in that way, like the way that Scott Fitzgerald is writing about the society at this time and the extreme affluence while still being able to note that like it can't last, it's not gonna last, it's such a fragile thing. It's so interesting because it will all be gone in a couple of years. And of course anybody who writes about the like a Roaring Twenties book now is going to do so with the knowledge that the Great Depression happens. So it's I think really interesting. And then a new favorite author, I read two Han Kang books this year and I have really enjoyed her work. She did The Vegetarian and The White Book are the two books of hers that I have read. The Vegetarian I liked a lot. Beautifully written, really interesting story, but I absolutely loved The White Book. The White Book is like kind of a little bit poetry, a little bit nonfiction, and it's about things that are white. Like every chapter is just another thing that is white, and she has this short, kind of varying in length. Some of them are really short, some of them are a couple pages, descriptions of that thing and its impact on people and what the emotions it elicits are. And I just really loved it. I thought that it was so beautiful and really interesting. I'm excited to read more of her work. I know that she has another novel called Lessons in Greek that I haven't read yet, but it's it's on the list, it's on the agenda. Well, that is the end. That's all the questions that I had, if a little bit out of order, but that brings us to the end of the video. I hope that you enjoyed. I would love to know any of the books that fit into any of these categories for you guys. So I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye!